United States military versus the drug cartels. This might be a hot take, but I don't think it's going to go the way most people believe it would. This Urban Sentinel, let's get into it. Current President Donald Trump has declared the Mexican drug cartels, which are numerous to one extent, a terrorist organization. Period, point blank. Now, it's not to say that the Mexican drug cartels are the only drug cartels in the world. There are dozens of other organizations, criminal enterprises that deal and traffic in narcotics. But the Mexican cartel, for what it's worth, geographically speaking, is right underneath our noses. They're right there versus other organizations that still have to cross the Pacific or the Atlantic to move their shipments in and out and that sort of thing. Also, being the fact is that the Mexican drug cartels as a whole, without getting into the weeds of distinguishing between the Sinaloa cartel and other cartels in the region, between which cartels started off in Colombia and expanded northwards and things like that, they're the biggest dog on the block. So you're going to want to take care of them first and then handle all the smaller ones as they go along. Now, my hot take on this is he's authorized effectively the use of the military, and people are already talking about he's going to authorize special forces to go in and handle it. Now, with that being said, the war on drugs has been waged since the very early 70s, and it went hard through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, most of it within the United States being on the street level, and predominantly the only people that were directly affected on the law enforcement end, on the government end, were people buying the narcotics and the immediate dealers selling the narcotics. And yeah, sure, DEA would make the occasional bust where they'd catch a distributor or a trafficker coming across the border, or a warehouse someplace where the cocaine is getting, packed up and wrapped up and getting ready to be shipped out across the country. But by and large, for 30 years consecutively, there was no real major dents made into any of the actual organizations where the point of production and that initial push into the country is made. You'd get leads taking you to this country, this locale in Mexico, this place in Colombia, and the military has been active. It's not a case of they've been hands off. They've been in there. The Rangers have been in there. Special forces have been in there. It's nothing new. This declaration of a terrorist organization, it simply puts another layer of condiments on top of the shit sandwich that's already there. And now my issue is this. The cartels, in comparison to the way they were in the 70s, 80s, 90s, changed. They adapted, they evolved, they branched out. So it's not simply a case of you've got a drug cartel who then has couriers and runners moving stuff into the United States, which then you've got a handful of people that pick up the product and they hand them out here and there to, loose organizations. They have full on, effectively, chains of command and control that are well oiled. They're functioning machines that both operate independently, and they're responsible for their own segments, their own sections, whether it be a specific city or region within a state or region within a country. And they have the ability, just like a franchise, to branch out on their own as needed. If they say, hey, get the word from the big guys, can we move into this territory? And that's what they do. Now, based upon law enforcement information collected over the last 15, 20 years, there are notable gangs that not simply just move drugs and that's who they buy from, but they are under the direct umbrella of the cartels themselves. So they're getting basically direct from the source, and they're getting the muscle and any equipment they need to push smaller gangs out. If it's a gang that could be absorbed, they take them in. If it's a gang that has large territory or could pose a problem, they get the ability to move them out any way necessary. Sometimes it's simply outselling them and taking their customers from them. Other cases, it's simply eliminating them block by block until they control an entire area. That on its own is difficult enough for local law enforcement and federal law enforcement to handle. Now you want to throw into the mix where you now have the cartels understanding that not only is it going to be more difficult for them to still continue to move their product through, and I say more difficult, not impossible. because they still get drugs in. There has not been such a tightening down on the flow of drugs coming in that on the inside of the United States there's been a depletion. There isn't. There are operations within our borders entirely controlled by the drug cartels. They've moved into territories, they've moved into businesses, they've moved into obscure locations that you're only going to know about if you know the guy who knows the guy who knows the guy, and that guy's willing to point a finger and go, yeah, 10 miles over that ridge, take a left by the stream, you'll find the camp set up over there. Now, with the advent of satellites and drones, things like that, that does make it easier. And I'm sure Border Patrol and, Customs and DEA will be getting more toys to utilize in those efforts. But with specifically talking about special operations, whether it be Army, whether it's, the Marine Recon, whether they send in Navy SEALs, whether there's a new unit made from the DEA and the FBI, whatever the case may be, it's going to be a different but yet familiar type of situation. You're going to have scenarios where you have a large organization where you may even have clearly identified leaders in the upper structure. You've got the boss, and you've got the underbosses, and you've got the district and regional captains, and each one of those guys is in charge of a certain thing. One might be in charge of recruiting personnel for manufacturing. One might be in charge of looking at locations for production. Another one is in charge of distribution and transportation. Another one might be in charge of the political aspect. You got to pay out a lot of people to make sure that they either look the other way or they keep their mouth shut as you do what you need to do. So there's definitely branches within the organization that they can identify. But the problem that they're going to run into is even when you pick, this is the number one guy here, or this guy's in charge of this, and you eliminate them, there's going to be 2 or 3 others either right there or nearby that will pick up the slack. And then you have to identify who they are. And then once again, you go after those guys, and then there's 3 or 4. And it becomes very familiar, and I'm sure with the military personnel that could be involved, especially if they've had experience over the last 2 decades of war in Afghanistan, they'll look at this and they'll see exactly that. They're going to see Afghanistan, but it's going to be from Mexico all the way up into the United States, because every time in the war against the terrorists in Al-Qaeda and ISIS, we'd identify, oh, this person is the number 2 person in this region. They take him out. Then suddenly that number 3 person becomes the number 2, and they're in a different area. They take him out. And then the number 4 and the number 3, they move up. So no matter how many times you take out the number 1, it doesn't stop the organization. You take out the number 2, it doesn't stop the organization. The more you take out, the wider it spreads and makes it harder, because now you've got guys that were mid-tier or bench warmers that no one knew who they were. But they already had their instructions. In the event that the next 5 guys above you get taken out, this is what you're going to be doing. And it goes back to now you're playing whack-a-mole, where every time a head pops up and you swing for it, a different one pops up over here, and even if you got that one, you've missed that one, you've missed that one. It's going to be along the same lines with the drug cartel, because there's no simple, concrete way to effectively take out whoever's in charge of a particular region and all of the subordinates directly underneath, interrupt the flow of whatever it is, communications, transportation, production, you name it, and stop it on the U.S. side, because you basically have to take the candle that's burning at both ends and be able to stop it simultaneously. And you're not going to be able to do that, because as soon as you focus on one, all the others start to shift. They start to redirect their operations and maybe to take a pause. In many cases, I've no doubt that they probably have dummy setups, little breadcrumbs that lead you to a place, and you think, oh, this is it, we've got them. And then once you stop and you take a look at everything that's there, you go, no, this was a dump site. This was something that in the event we got close, we'd find this dummy spot, but not the other location. And that's going to continue. And the big difference between Mexico and Afghanistan is Mexico is on our border and they're already in the U.S. It's not a clear case of, oh, they only do their dealings in Mexico, and then they just simply chuck it over the border wall or send it through a tunnel, but everything else on the inside of the U.S. is perfectly normal, perfectly fine, hunky-dory. No, it's everywhere. It's pervasive to the extent that, yes, there are some places any individual can look and say, yeah, that neighborhood, that town, that street, that section, high drug traffic, high gang affiliation, high crime rate. But there are other places where you'll pass by, you'll drive through, and it's almost like the analogy would be the stop sign and the tree. You drive down a particular road that you go down once a day, once a week, whatever it is, and you pull up to the stop sign and you slow down to stop, but there's a tree there. So you have to stop and then edge forward to see past the tree just to make sure there's not a pedestrian crossing or some kid on the bike. And that goes on, and then one day you pull up, you come to a stop, you edge forward, and you notice the tree's gone. And you look down, you can clearly see there's a stump of where the tree was, but now you can't think, when did that tree get taken down? Was it yesterday? Was it last week? You have no immediate recollection because you become complacent to going a certain direction, seeing certain things in the landscape, and reacting to them in the same way. So at one point that tree was gone, but you didn't recognize it. And it's kind of the same way with a lot of criminal activity in certain areas. Sometimes you just don't see it because you either don't realize that you're actually looking at it or you're not sure what you're looking for. Someone can come from outside your area and go, drug, gambling, prostitution, and point it all out because they know what they're looking at, they recognize it, and then when you see it, you go, oh, you're right, that is an indicator, or now it does sort of look like I've seen the progress go on, but it's been so subtle that it's not necessarily a punch in the face type of thing. It's very slow, very gradual, moving a little bit at a time. And part of that is, plain and simple, the criminals want to avoid law enforcement spotting them and stopping them for as long as possible. So in many cases, they're not going to come in, loud and proud, making a whole bunch of noise, making a big scene. They're going to move in very slowly, gradually, not even on a regular basis, just sort of intermittently dipping into a certain area. And some of it does have to do with territory controlled by one gang or another gang, whatever the case may be. But here in the United States and in Mexico, what you're going to end up with is if the cartels decide that they need to take more aggressive action to, at the minimum, distract law enforcement and distract military, it's going to run along the same situation. When you had the war in Afghanistan, you would have our military find a weapons cache, maybe make a strike on a small camp, take out several terrorists. In retaliation for that, you might end up with troops getting ambushed in a completely different area, or a base getting a barrage of a mortar attack that goes on for, it seems, relentlessly hour upon hour upon hour. And then we find out where the mortar strikes are coming from. We take those out, and then 2 days later, a car bomb goes off at a checkpoint someplace in a secured green zone area, and people are trying to figure out, what the hell is going on, and it keeps going back and forth. That's the situation that you can end up with here. So you can have, all the special ops guys go in, swoop into certain areas in Mexico with or without the cooperation of the Mexican authorities and take out a bunch of bad guys and blow up a bunch of production facilities. You can have law enforcement here in the U.S. simultaneously making strike raids on locations that they know are places of transportation, distribution, or even just where they lay their heads down to take a quick nap before they go out. And all those things go on. And then 3-4 days later, suddenly we're getting car bombs going off in our streets. We're getting targeted assassination of law enforcement. We're getting people that normally would pretty much be considered law-abiding citizens suddenly committing crimes for no reason, but the reason being is someone got a hold of someone close to them, a family member, something like that, and it becomes that simple: do what we say and this person lives. If you don't, you're going to find pieces of them strung out across the highway for the next week or so. Because the reality is the cartel is vicious. The cartel will use any type of torture that they feel necessary, or more correctly stated, unnecessary, going above and beyond to make their point, to get the impression put into your mind that you don't want to cross them. Now, with that being said, again, the average everyday citizen is going to have zero control over that. And what you're going to end up having is a situation where when that starts to occur, when it suddenly becomes the law enforcement that are trying to help out and assist in this war on the terrorists, when they start getting targeted, their natural instinct, turtle in the shell, is everybody is the enemy. And then we run back again to that situation where every police officer in law enforcement is looking at every other civilian as if that's the guy that's going to put a bullet in me. I need to start acting more aggressively towards them, which then leads to the citizen population getting irritated, getting angry and fed up with the police for pushing them around when they're not the problem. which then, of course, allows the actual drug dealers and the people that push their drugs to then sort of tiptoe by while everyone's too busy being distracted and arguing over here. And without a doubt, our military, whether it's Delta Force, SEALs, you name it, they're highly trained, they're highly specialized, and I'm sure they've done a lot of damage in any of the theaters that they've been in. But we're also dealing with, and along the same aspect, cartels that have been fighting against, foreign militaries, Mexico, Colombia, Nicaragua, any place down in there on the regular basis, as well as fighting other cartels. They've been engaging in urban warfare for decades. So it's not a case of, there's going to be some 15, 16, 17-year-old kid who's just getting his feet wet in the organization, but you're also going to have 25, 35, and 40-year-old guys that have been around the block several times, and they've got plenty of bodies that they've stacked up. So it won't necessarily be a cakewalk for the people on our side. And in many cases, if you say send up some of those lieutenants and some of those, mid-level guys with training and experience, and they come into the United States, and they very well could be here already, and they start organizing the gangs that are here, the U.S. gangs that are born and raised, that know the territory, that know the area, that can move relatively freely and uninterrupted, and start giving them that higher level of training so they can basically stand on their own or go out against any law enforcement as it may come in. That's going to add a whole different element. So now it won't just be this gang versus that gang, or it won't be that one small operation getting taken out by 20, 30 law enforcement. It's going to end up being platoon size levels of street gangs working in coordination with other gangs around an area to seize control of the area as it is overtly. And as much as people like to talk about guns in the US, there are a lot of them. But there are also a lot of guns that are in other countries that move a hell of a lot smoother across borders illegally into the hands of the cartel, that they don't even have to worry about that. They can easily smuggle up the type of hardware that these groups would need to not just simply hold their own, but dominate in any area. And then that leads to the next level of escalation. So strictly again, my point of view is this: can the military make an effective impact on the current level of drug trafficking and drug operations inside and outside the U.S.? Definitely can, if they have zero interference or preferably some cooperation from other countries. But again, if you are someone who's a politician or someone in the military of Mexico, whatever the case may be, and you're on the take or you're under threat, you're going to either not cooperate, or you're going to, at the minimum, provide misinformation or give the heads up to the people that have been watching you, watching your family, and are waiting to take them out. So they get the heads up before the raids happen. And that cycle continues on and on. And as I referenced with the war in Afghanistan, that was, effectively speaking, an organization that did not have a Navy. They did not have an Air Force. They didn't have spy satellites. They didn't have high-altitude drones. They didn't have artillery. They didn't have armored vehicles. They pretty much, for Afghanistan, had semi-automatic and fully automatic weapons, hand grenades, small explosives doing IEDs, running around, blending in and out with the entire population around them. And they fought, and let's be honest, they fought to a standstill, a stalemate, 20 years against the world's strongest military. So this isn't going to be, to one extent, that much different. It might even be more to their advantage, because unless there becomes some agreement with Mexico, we're not going to be putting aircraft carrier worth of artillery and armor and weapons and aircraft into this war on terror. We're still going to identify one group, focus on taking out the leadership, taking out the structure, disrupting the flow, and trying to isolate that area. Then take out the next group and isolate that area. At the same time, work in the U.S., find out where the drugs are coming in from, who's bringing in the weapons, where do they have things stashed, because not everything goes out automatically right then and there, same day delivery like Amazon. A lot of that stuff is stacked up, put off to the side, and kept basically low profile, and then trickled out here and there. So even if we thought we grabbed 10 tons worth of cocaine, caught it at the border, great. there's probably another 10 tons spread out across the whole Southwest, with another 3-4 tons in transit across the rest of the country. So a lot of these things where, visually speaking, you see that, oh, we've made a difference, until you look behind it, and then you start to notice that we made some effort, but there's still a lot more. And as that goes along, as I've said, I feel that when we start doing these direct actions against the cartel, when we start making these strikes and treating it as if it's some activity over there, and by over there, I mean, across the Atlantic, across the Pacific, that's where the fatal flaw is going to be, because it's already here. It just depends upon how quickly the cartel decides to respond and react to anything that we do. And if you have a situation where, they're now officially declared a terrorist organization, and anyone and any other organizations affiliated with them would be treated the same, that flips the script on even something simple as gang association and things like that. That changes the directive, and you may have a lot of people domestically saying, hey, we don't want to be considered terrorists. We're just low-level drug dealers, nothing more. They either have to shit or get off the pot. And so they have to make that decision. Do they turn on the cartel and the gang members and the people that know who they are, know where they live, and have something over them? Or do they go full on and lean into it and then just, settle for, well, whatever's going to happen, it's going to happen. Say hello to my little friend and going out like, Scarface. So I will find, to one extent, it be very surprising if things go smoothly. And I put that in quotes as it is, because nothing in that sort of conflict goes smoothly. But I would be highly surprised if things go more beneficially the way that it probably looks on paper. And again, I'm not a military strategist. I'm not any type of tactician. I'm just looking at the long history of the war on drugs, all of the notable events where we've gotten the upper hand against the drug cartel, but yet the cartel's still here, getting bigger and bigger every single year that goes by. We're finding more cases of drugs showing up in states and regions within the states that never had that issue before. And I would be highly impressed to see a map of the United States that has any place that has fewer drug problems and drug arrests or anything else related to that over the last 10 years. Because I'm pretty sure, it does not matter. From the high mountains of Maine all the way down to the, Simi Valley area, the drugs are everywhere. Someone has to get them there. Someone has to make sure that the product gets out, the product gets sold, and the cash makes its way back to the cartel. So it's not a case of they're just tossing out the window and, somebody picks it up on their way to work and that's it. So there's a constant chain of communication and connection going on. So again, with that being said, I think that this new war, or this continuation of the existing war, just branching off into almost like a spinoff. We have the war on drugs, and now we have the war on drugs terrorist edition, going off in its own little direction. It's going to be something to keep an eye on, and it's going to be something that you, me, and everyone else that is literally not on the front line, finger on the trigger, we have to be more aware of our surroundings. Because again, if you're going to be called a terrorist organization, you're going to start doing things to terrorize. And if you start Googling or go on YouTube and look at some of the news reports that come out of Mexico, that come out of some of these Central American countries, when it comes to that, it's open warfare in a lot of those regions. It is absolute open warfare. Cartels, they have their version of, up armored vehicles. They have their heavy weaponry, actual machine guns, everything like that. They've got their own on the take police officers that go out in uniform with full, federal equipment and take out competitors or anyone that basically, did not bend the knee and cooperate with them. So that type of situation that has been going on down there is simply now going to migrate up here, whether it be initially what you would look at as a direct foreign invasion, or whether it be a Trojan horse type of situation. They've already been on the inside. They've already integrated themselves well within a lot of different areas, within communities, within cities, within towns. And now it's simply when they get that call, when they get that signal, they go out and do something, because they know what is critical in their area. They know what the weak spots are in their area. They know how to, slow things up, make things more complicated for law enforcement or the military coming after them. So it's not going to be quite the same. It's going to be more of terrorist operations in their home territory, but also in our own home territory, where you can't put your finger on who the good guy is, who the bad guy is, because everyone ends up being questionable in their actions. Anyway, like, share, subscribe, leave a comment below, tell me what you think, and I'll catch you in the next one.